Hello, 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 hello. This is so exciting. Welcome back to Coastal Insight Season 3. I am Makai Sharp. I am casting in from the Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Arian Tomar. Arian, do you want to say hi?
For sure. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to season 3 of Coastal Insights. I am your second co-host, Arian, casting from the unceded territory of the Chiana Beecher Bay First Nation.
Right. So, why is this so exciting today? Because this is the last episode of season 3. I cannot believe it has already been the entire season, all 6 episodes, and today's episode is about sustaining hope. Now, season 3 of Coastal Insights is all about hope, equity, and advocacy. And as the title suggests, we're focusing on these 3 attributes in a world changed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And today's episode, Sustaining Hope, essentially what we're going to be covering today is despite the overwhelming challenges facing youth, there are numerous and rich examples of young people leading change at the community, national, and international levels. So today, me and Arian will discuss with our guests to find out what inspired them to make change and what drives them for the long haul. Some positive changes from the last year will be highlighted, and Arian and I and our guests will share our opinions on what kind of leaders, businesses, and careers are needed the most for the future.
Thanks, Makai. Seeing as it is our last episode, this will be the last time I ask you as an audience to put in where you're casting, where you're tuning in from. We love to see this kind of information just to see how far Coastal Insights is reaching. But yeah, I'll also talk about some of the partnerships that make Coastal Insights possible. So for this season, Raincoast Conservation has partnered with Take a Stand Youth for Conservation. Raincoast is a group of humans, researchers, scientists, and conservationists based on Wasanich territory who are doing incredible work to confront the problems facing the diverse ecosystems of our province. Raincoast does this through their mission to inspire, investigate, and inform. Akai, can you talk about our second partnership organization?
Right. Yes. And so this season was a partnership between Raincoast and Take a Stand, an organization that me and Arian are both a part of. And much like Take a Stand, much like Raincoast, Take a Stand is principles and goals are based on fostering an informed community. And what I continue to appreciate about Take a Stand is their focus on motivating and empowering young people to protect the environment through art and film and youth-driven actions, continuing to combine and encourage the combination of art and science. So for this episode, we have 3 fantastic guests, and we will now introduce our first guest today. Arian, do you want to put up the slide? Hello. So this is Maria Melanides. Oh, Marina Melanides. My bad. That's totally my fault. It was not in my not my notes. My bad. So Marina is a Greek-Canadian settler on unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, currently known as Vancouver, BC. As the founder and development director of Youth for Nature, Marina is fiercely passionate about bridging false silos across nature and climate, while supporting young people to access meaningful, paid opportunities to create nature-climate solutions grounded in community and justice. Marina holds a master's in forestry and a bachelor's in natural resource conservation from the University of British Columbia, and currently serves on the board of Global Witness. She's a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Scholar, a 2022 YWCA Woman of Distinction nominee, and has been named as one of Canada's top 30 under 30 sustainability leaders and top 25 under 25 environmentalists. She loves 70s rock music, good vegan food, and the BC coast, and is attempting to learn modern Greek. Hello, Marina.
Am I up?
Yes, you are. Hello, how's it going?
Okay. Hi. Hi, everybody. It's going really good. Hi, Makai. Hi, Arian. Thanks so much for hosting this space and for inviting me in. So excited to chat today.
Thanks so much for being here. Makai, can you introduce our second guest as well?
Yes, so our second guest today, is Will Krola. And Will's journey first started while working in waste management planning. He has since worked as an independent consultant with small businesses to improve their sustainability with kelp and oyster farming and on Oceanwise seafood team, and participated in the Ocean Bridge program and City Hive's Enviro Lab. As a result of his work on the latter two programs, Will co-founded Surge, a current project aimed at building shoreline resilience through living breakwaters in the form of oyster reefs in the face of sea level rise. Another passion of Will's is his ongoing work with the latest iteration of EnviroLab, which he hopes will motivate other young Canadians to activate their communities against the threats of climate change. Hello,
Welcome.
Will.
Hey, folks. Thanks.
How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you. Is there anything else that we didn't cover in your intro?
No, that's about it. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And Aryan, do you want to introduce our last guest?
Yes. Okay. So Ishmam Bhuya is a medical student at UBC who began organizing in support of a contentious modular housing project near his high school when he was in 12th grade. He then went on to organize with the UBC Social Justice Center, COVID-19 Coming Together, and various housing justice organizations in Vancouver. Give it up for Ishmam. Welcome to the stream.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so jumping right into our episode on sustaining hope, our first question for you all is, how did your work get started? And so whoever wants to take it away can just go for it.
Yeah, that's such a hard question. But maybe this is actually something that would be helpful for folks that are listening, is that my path at least wasn't linear. Like, there wasn't like one decision that I made that I can trace everything back to, it was really like a product of learning and trying new things and meeting people and going out of my comfort zone and then taking risks and learning some more. I think like I've always been interested in doing work around nature loss and the climate crisis ever since I was young. I think growing up here on what's currently called Vancouver really helped with that, being, having the ocean to my left and the mountains to my right and the forest behind me. It was really hard to not just fall in love with the natural world and feel a really like interior desire to do whatever I can to protect it once I've learned that it was at risk. But I mean, I took so many paths. I worked for the government for a little bit and then decided that wasn't for me. I was doing some work in academia and I got my master's, and that was really interesting. And I might go back to that maybe in the future. Kind of fell into youth activism and climate justice work sort of by necessity, is realizing that if I want to be a young person in this space and do meaningful work, I kind of need to fight for that space. And I want to be able to support other people so that they don't have to fight for that space to be able to do meaningful work for nature loss and for climate crisis as a young person. So by kind of being able to try new things and meet people, I sort of fall into where I am now, and kind of just sort of recognizing that there is a gap between young people that want to do work and the opportunities and resources to support those young people to do that work meaningfully, and then figuring out maybe that gap is where I can help, where I can step in. So yeah, it was really about like exploring things, figuring out where maybe there's a problem and what I have the skills and the ability to kind of step in and help. That sort of got me here. But it was definitely not linear. Tried a lot of things.
I mean, when is it linear, Marina? I feel that as well. I'm also based out of what is now known as Vancouver, but I'm originally from Ottawa, so far from the ocean, but most of my work, or pretty much all of my work, does surround the ocean. And I think for me, that really goes back to just like, when I was young, I really did start to love nature, as so many other people do, especially in this field of work. And when I say when I was young, I mean when I was like a little wee Will. But it's a pursuit. But I had family out on the West Coast, and we would come out like every year. And having that kind of like pull of the ocean was pretty special. And so I felt like that was just something that I knew I needed to be near the ocean when I was older. And then as I got older, I started kind of struggling between, do I want to do something I love or something that feels like it has impact? And then I realized you can do both. And so that's what kind of drew me to environmental work. And ocean specifically is, I think, a really great way to put that into perspective is like if you look at that the pale blue dot photo from NASA, like back in however many years ago that came out, right? That really put into perspective, I think, visually for a lot of people for the first time, just how much of our planet is oceans and how the oceans are the lifeblood of our planet. That if they're not healthy, we can't be healthy as a species, as a global ecosystem or whatever. So for myself, needing to kind of work to, in some way, work around the ocean and for its health and its conservation, and to also like think about it in its relation to humans as well, because we think about the land so much because that's where we live, but we do interact with the ocean pretty much every day, no matter where we live. So for me, through my work with Surge and then also on the Oceanwide Seafood team, both of those things have like this huge direct impact on that. And then just thinking about how it and connects with people as well.
I can answer the question next. I think that I, conversely to Marina and Will, can draw it back to one moment, which I think is probably not typical. I started doing organizing work in high school, and I definitely didn't know what I was doing. And it was in response to a municipally proposed supportive housing project that was slated to be built across the street from Sir Winston Churchill Secondary and Sir Wilfrid Laurier School in so-called Vancouver. And I was a 12th grade student at Churchill at the time. And I remember just being appalled by the extent of awfulness in the neighborhood. There were signs that were on almost every lawn nearby that read, our kids matter, our kids' safety matters. Obviously making the argument that, like housing people and bringing people who are homeless into the neighborhood and giving them secure housing was somehow a threat to the school and the safety of children nearby. Awful stuff. And so we kind of just built a student campaign to combat that narrative, to say, actually, we're not afraid of this at all and think that this is a wonderful thing to have near a school. And that's kind of how I got started. Our campaign was successful. There was initially a pause in the city's process to build the housing. But after a few months of fighting, the housing project was built, and now 78 people have pretty awesome housing. They get their own air conditioning and heating in every unit that's like controlled within the unit. And they're, like the neighborhood's happy with it now. So that's kind of where I got started. And then that led to more housing justice work at UBC, mostly focused municipally, and more recently some work around drug checking and making sure that drug use for students is safer. I also am a bit different than Marina and Will in that I haven't done much climate work. So maybe offer a different perspective. Most of my work so far has been on housing, some anti-poverty work, and making sure that people aren't dying from doing things that they need to stay alive.
Thanks everyone for sharing just these contrasting paths to where you are right now, and to where you're making an impact in your given fields. Our next question is, what about your work inspires you? And I think a lot of you have touched on this and just like kind of like what got you doing work in the first place, but maybe you could speak about how your inspiration has changed as you've kind of gotten older and deepened your connection with your work.
I think I kind of touched on this.
Yeah, well, you go.
But I'll say it again. I think it's kind of twofold. On the one hand, I think with same as a lot of people who are in the climate space, and people who aren't as well, but that have had any kind of interaction with nature, be it small or large or whatever, sustained or not, the beauty of nature and its like wacky weirdness as well. I mean, especially working with the ocean too, when you start to learn about all the life that's beneath the waves, it's a weird world. It's nothing like what's above the surface and on land, but it's fascinating and it's so cool and it's so beautiful and so important as well, crucial. We think of them as separate systems, whether it be in the ocean or in lakes and rivers as well, or anything in the water, where we're not really. but it's all connected, right? I mean, it feels like a little bit of like mumbo jumbo at times, but it's true, and we can't exclude those two different kind of fields. And the other side is the people. I think that the more and more you work with people in these spaces, the more and more you're just amazed at the background of everybody and the passion they bring, and how inspiring they are in their own inspiration as well, and how they come to their work and what they put into it, the energy, the love for the planet and for other people as well, and just the dedication. So I think that is just incredibly inspiring in its own right. And you want to do right by the people that you work with as well, because they're trying to do right by others in the planet also. So it kind of all comes together at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I echo. Well, and I think my inspiration has changed a little bit over time. It used to be that, yeah, the natural world around me was the biggest source of inspiration, and it still is a very large, significant source of inspiration. But people, as of recent years, have become, I think, my primary source of inspiration specifically, and motivation, honestly, because I know they want to talk about what keeps us motivated as well. The work that other young people are doing all over the world to protect the natural ecosystems around them, to support their communities, to stand up to injustice, and to advocate and pitch for climate justice in the spaces that they live and in the communities and ecosystems that they live. That's the most inspiring thing for me. Youth for Nature, one of our biggest programs, is a storytelling campaign. And we're collecting stories from young people in different languages. We ran the campaign in 6 different languages, and in different formats of stories too. So whether it's like a text-based, like an essay kind of story, or if it's a photo essay or a video or poetry or art or something in between, a whole range of stories from young people from all over the world. And we ended up collecting, now I think the count is over 200 stories from young people from over 60 countries, of work that those folks are doing for both climate and nature in their communities. And we've got them all displayed on a beautiful story map. Maybe I'll throw the link in our chat and y'all can put it up later in a second. But this is a full map and you can explore and zoom in and read and listen to and look at all the stories from young people doing work, whether that's like leading agroforestry campaigns and training workshops for their community members in Nigeria, or working with indigenous communities in Brazil and the Amazon about how we can collect seeds and have diverse seeds and make that like an economic opportunity for those communities, or it's running a little composting station in their high-rise apartment building in Belgium. Like, it's a whole range of work, working with coral reefs and shores in Indonesia and communities, and trying to record the diversity of sea life in those coastal systems in Indonesia. It's a whole range of work that young people are doing all over the world. And yeah, whenever I need a little dose of inspiration, I find that story map really, really inspiring and helpful. It's good to know that there are other young people like us that also care and that are doing work on the ground for our shared planet and also for our specific communities.
Thank you so much for that, Marina. I just wanted to make a point that throughout this whole season, I find we keep coming back to this fundamental idea that what is so inspiring and driving for people everywhere who are advocating for change, whether it's in community health or in ensuring, like in advocating for a cleaner planet, is just conversation, knowing you're not alone, knowing that, you know, the message isn't insignificant, and it's a more broader story. And I think it's even represented in the spectrum of the work that the 3 of you are doing, whereas Ishmael is focusing on community health, but how that's so fundamental in advocating for the planet and how they're all so intertwined. I also just wanted to ask Ishmael, what about your work inspires you as well, before we go on to the next question?
Sure. Yeah. I think my primary driver is that I think the work that we do has very clear material impacts. Everything that we do at the SJC or PAC is driven by, like, how is this materially improving the lives of the people that we're working with? And I think everything boils down to that. And the other part of this is that there are so many people in our communities who don't have a choice, right? Organizing, advocating for themselves is a survival tactic. It's necessary because of their condition. It's necessary because we have deeply broken systems. And many of the things that they're fighting are so acute. They're going to use a substance, and that can lead to an overdose within a few minutes. They don't have housing, and that precipitates a whole, like a whole host of different problems. There are, like thousands of people who will be sleeping outside tonight. There are thousands of people who will be at risk of dying tonight due to an overdose. These things are acute, and it's so necessary that people are fighting against them. More recently, the work that I've been doing has been around safer drug use on campus for students. UBC is a world-leading institution in drug policy research. We're probably, like the top institution that pumps out research on this topic. But our institution also is severely lacking in actually responding to the drug or the overdose crisis, which is, in my view, the single biggest crisis that as a community we're facing right now locally. We have a current residence policy that students can get kicked out of or get their residence contracts terminated and be evicted if they're found using drugs. And we don't have robust medical amnesty policies. These things kill people, and they're happening at a world-leading research institution. So the hypocrisy of all of this and the acute timeline and the severity of all of this, I think, is what motivates me to keep going.
Thanks, everyone, for sharing just kind of what continues to inspire your work and how that has changed a bit. Taking a look at like how all of you are approaching taking action in your own way, I'm wondering, like, what about your background and upbringing has shaped how you bring about action? And at least for me, as a climate filmmaker and just like racial justice advocate, it's like intrinsically tied to my upbringing, growing up in a multicultural household that's also intergenerational, where we have to use stories to communicate like complex themes about identity and race, and also just like culture. And being able to bond over the newest Star Wars movie, sometimes that can say more than what we try to communicate across all the languages spoken in my family. And so as a result of that, like I seek to communicate the uncommunicatable through visual art and through my documentary filmmaking. And so in my case, like that's how my background has shaped how I enact action. But I want to hear from everyone else on this call as well.
I was going to nominate Ishvam to go first because you haven't gone first yet for a question.
Sure. I am currently training to become a physician. And I think that often the focus of medical professionals and healthcare workers more broadly is very insular and isolated from anything else happening in the world. I feel like implicitly there has been a culture of like treating people when they come into the clinic and then recognizing maybe things that happened before. We call them social determinants of health, but we do very little to address them. We recognize that they exist, do very little to address them. But I think it's important to recognize that, like ordinary people spend very little time thinking about their health, spend very little time thinking about, or like they spend very little time in a clinic. Majority of people's lives are out here in the real world, outside of a doctor's office or outside of a hospital. And I think it's so vital for people to address the things that actually affect people's lives, their housing, their ability to access food, their ability to access services equitably. So I think that's kind of it's me being angry with how things have been presented to me so far, or things that I've observed, and trying to change things. And there is a massive change in medical education that I've witnessed at UBC, trying to address these things and being more holistic and recognizing that health is so much more than like that one thing that we can name that people, or the one thing that we write on the line that says diagnosis.
Thank you so much for that, Ishmam. Especially that final line, that like the eloquence and the way you just reduce that to such simple terms is so enlightening. So thank you for sharing that. I noticed that within these calls, it's kind of everyone's like, who's gonna go first? Who's gonna go first? Who's gonna talk next? So I will nominate, I guess, Will, if you want to speak to this as well, just to keep it going.
Yeah, I think so. Background and upbringing. I mean, I think my family is all very service based. Like they're all very immediate to go and help each other and others. And I think that really founded. I think growing up, our parents really instilled into us like this big sense of respect for others and also the planet as well, and also humility. And I think that feeds that kind of service ethic that I had instilled in me from a pretty young age. And I think, as I was talking about, like, there's this quintessential experience a lot of people have of just coming to find that moment when you just love nature so much. And I don't know, maybe it's something like when you feel that kind of fresh air in your nose for the first time, or you feel like the sun on your skin on like a beautiful summer day or whatever it is, or like dipping your feet into like a new body of water that you've never been in before. And you're like, wow, like, I don't know, for myself, I've now, I guess, been in 3 different oceans. I'd love to touch every single one. And every time it's like, this is something different. And so wanting to kind of act for that and for others. So I think those kind of values that were instilled from a very young age were crucial in helping make some of the decisions. And then when I got to UBC, where I did my studies, I think from there, there's a really strong focus on sustainability, which is what I studied, of course, and also the planet and the ocean as well. Some of my first work was in the waste side of things, was founded in ocean plastic as well. And I think for myself, it's a lot of, I think you kind of start to have a lot of guilt living in a Western, very industrialized country for the impact that you have. And I mean, I often talk about the fact that there's been this massive propaganda machine over the years by corporations and governments to put the onus on individuals to make a change. And I don't want to dismiss the power that individuals have, because collective action really does work. But at the same time, like, that guilt is like instilled in us from a young age, and it's our individual actions, like turn off the tap, turn off the lights, recycle, which isn't even that. I don't want to like bash recycling, but it's not even that effective ultimately. It's just, these are things that are instilled in us, and we own that when necessarily we shouldn't. So I think I do carry some of that, and I think that has fueled a lot of the work that I've done, and also just that I wouldn't want somebody else to feel that way in the future. I think a lot of youth these days are feeling the same thing. I mean, you talk to a lot of people I work with, my friends, even my parents now, who aren't necessarily youth, but still they feel these same things of this climate anxiety that a lot of people are feeling. And I think you kind of want to be a champion against that, and to make sure that other people don't have to feel that way in the future as well. So I don't know, I guess it goes back to that service side of things that just is so, for me, fundamental to who I am. And that was instilled from a very young age.
Systemic crises require systemic solutions. And from both of you, Ishmael and Will, that's becoming a theme from both of your responses. Totally resonate and echo that. To kind of try to answer the question maybe quickly, neither my parents or really none of my family members do what I do. Like, I didn't have folks that were engaged in the environmental space or the nature and climate space to gain inspiration from. I'm still kind of one of the only folks, not the only, but one of the only folks in my family that like went into more of a science space rather than a different direction with their studies. But something that my parents did do for me and my wider family is really encourage curiosity and encourage learning. I loved school as a kid, and that was always very encouraged from my family members and from the folks around me. Something that like was actually quite a specific moment that helped shift my trajectory a little bit is my mom got me a subscription to the National Geographic's Kids magazine. I don't know if they still do those. I hope so, because those are great. Those slapped. I love those magazines. I think that's when I first learned that like extinction was a thing, and that we're at an extinction crisis and we're losing full species. And I remember having a little mini like at 8 years old existential crisis about extinction. And that sort of, I think, pushed me more into the environmental space, and also learning about climate change. Although the tips in that magazine were very individual, turn off the lights. I got really obsessed with turning off the lights and keeping the fridge door like not open for that long. That was something I like kind of latched onto as a kid. And then as I've grown older and had the like really the privilege and opportunity to like engage in higher education, to go to university, to go to a big school like the University of British Columbia, I think that's where I was able to meet new folks and gain new perspectives and learn, oh, actually these are systemic issues, and these are also like the role of people and of justice are critical to these issues. And that really also shifted my trajectory in the work that I do now. Oh, it's capitalism, it's colonialism, like these big large scale systems that are designed this way to result in wide scale extractivism, to result in the loss of cultures and peoples and ecosystems and species. Like this is by design, and therefore that we need wide scale systemic solutions, which is going to require collective action, which is going to require community, which is going to require a huge redistribution of resources away from systems and corporations and industries that are only fueling and worsening the problem, towards communities on the ground, shifting those resources towards young people, towards shifting the way that we design our economic system. So I think learning about that has also kind of pushed me into this space, and I wouldn't have been able to be here if I wasn't like supported and able to access a university learning space, and really supported to be encouraged to keep learning and to keep being curious.
Marina, I have a follow-up questions for Will and Ishmael based on your response, but I'm wondering like how and when were you first exposed to the issues that you're working to address now? Like what Marina brought up about like National Geographic Kids, because I just remember that like I had the same thing with my family, and I would ravenously just like read these and be like, these pictures are so cool, I want to see the world, I want to like make a difference. Oh no, the ice caps are melting, where are the penguins gonna go, what about the polar bears? So I'm wondering, like, for Ishmael and Will, like how and when were you first exposed to these, like to the issues that you're working to address now? And also, like, I think everyone's been to UBC and is now based in like so-called Vancouver, which I think is cool, which is just a way for us to like take different slices of your lives, like in the context of like one place, which I don't know, I think is really interesting to compare and contrast.
Yeah, I can go first. Again, I haven't done much climate stuff, so I didn't really have a nature moment. But I think homelessness and poverty, to me, were presented as inevitable features of our society that have always existed and that we can't get rid of, and that we should just accept death and suffering. But that's not true. We now know that there are societies currently that have beat this problem, and that a few decades ago here in so-called Vancouver, homelessness was virtually not a problem, and that the crisis that we're in right now is the result of a concerted effort from people who have had power over the past few decades. And I think that's the realization that shifted kind of my impulse to get involved. So I think that's what it was. Just realizing that, hey, these things can change, and they don't have to be this way.
I just want to briefly acknowledge the parallels and theme between, seeing something that feels wrong and then realizing that we're not looking at the bigger picture and what actually needs to be held accountable. Whereas, corporations, systems are putting the blame on the individual to, save the planet and creating that climate anxiety in us as people. Whereas we have to kind of look broader, what bigger things are at play that we can be holding accountable. And I think that kind of works in the same context of what you were talking about, Ishmael. And I just, I thought that was an interesting parallel. But yeah, what about you, Will?
So I can't really think of what the exact moment was. I know it was very young, but it's a bit of a silly answer, I suppose, but I think I'd like to imagine maybe this is the moment. So when I was pretty young, we took a trip out to Drumheller, Alberta, which has been a site of a lot of dinosaur digs. And as a kid, like as many other kids, I was like a big dinosaur fan, and this was one of those establishing moments of that passion as a young boy. And I remember I thought it was so cool, but that's probably when I learned about extinction for the first time. And that's probably pretty heartbreaking for a little kid who loves dinosaurs to be like, wait, they're all gone. I remember coming back, we got this little green dinosaur book in the gift shop, and it was definitely above my reading level. But I would read it every night, and I'd memorize the binomial names of every dinosaur species or whatever. And I'd know them, right? And so I'd like to think, and I don't think this is true, but I'd like to think that I made that connection somehow after hearing about the crises that we were in as a planet. And just thinking to myself as a young kid, I don't want that to happen to anything else. So again, I really don't think that's what the source is, but I can't remember what it is. And I think I just ultimately, having spent some time outside, out in nature, and I mean, I say nature too, but really what is nature? That's a question that's a big one, and I won't necessarily tackle because I don't have the answers, and I don't think it's very easy to pin down. But when I say that, I mean, I went to overnight camp for 10 years as a kid. So getting to spend time there, and whatever travels we did around Canada as well. That was always really inspiring too, because getting to see the amazing different landscapes that Canada has to offer is just awe-inspiring. So I think connecting those things and just piecing that all together, it goes back to my love of dinosaurs as a kid, ultimately.
I think that's something I relate to as well. I remember seeing Jurassic Park, and I knew it was a movie, but it just felt so real that I just reach out and touch a Velociraptor. I would never want to, but just to see that represented so well. And I think that's at least for me, Will, same, love nature, but also the power of filmmaking to kind of put you in a place you can never actually visit. Just kind of show you what's possible with a little bit of creativity. So with that, I want to jump to our next question about what role do youth play in change making? Typically, I think about all the wisdom that older generations have to pass down to youth, which I think, if you just look at it from that perspective, it seems like we just always take from those who have come before us. But, in what ways can we give back and contribute to these larger movements as youth?
I might kind of reframe the premise of the question a little bit and argue that youth are playing a leading role in creating change for both nature loss and climate crisis, and that young people have always been kind of on the front lines of more progressive or radical, which I put in quotes, because what's really radical is a planet where everyone can thrive. Radical? I'd argue no, but on the front lines of radical change and pushing the political window towards and the arc towards justice. I think youth, frontline communities, especially Black, Indigenous youth, young people of color have always been on the front lines. What young people are really missing is resources, opportunities, platforms, and sometimes I think, especially now, when a lot of us are doing this work online, in a COVID state as well, access to community is something that I think a lot of young people are often missing. Knowing that there are other young people that are also trying to create change and do this work. That's what Youth for Nature tries to do, is sort of interrupt that sort of cycle where young people try to create change, be leading on movements towards justice for nature, for climate, for communities, and then experience a lack of resources or experience burnout or tokenism or extractive relationships, and then end up maybe stepping back or having to take like long breaks or even leaving the movement entirely. Like, I've experienced this, lots of my peers have experienced this cycle. So that's something that Youth for Nature is trying to do, is provide resources and support and community, including mentorship and funding and networks, so that young people have the skills and the support to continue to lead work and be on the front lines. I mean, in 2019, with the rise of the youth climate strikes and the rise of Fridays for Future, like, I don't think anybody would argue that young people did not play a fundamental role at pushing the climate crisis movement and the movement towards climate justice forward significantly. And I think we're at an interesting point in time now where, especially with COVID and with the disruptions and the sort of barriers or to being able to mobilize in that way, that happened that way. I think we're at an interesting point of, we need to continue to support youth so that we can kind of pick that back up and really push forward and continue pushing, because the climate crisis and nature loss is continuing to get worse. And with the latest IPCC report, like, we know that even if all governments fulfilled all of their promises, we're not going to reduce warming to 2 degrees. And that's even if they fulfilled all of their promises, which we've seen Canada not do that in the past. So I would maybe like reframe the premise of the question and say that young people are leading, and we need young people to be leading and bringing bold, ambitious ideas to this space, and providing new energy that can, like, learn from folks that have been doing this for a long time and provide new energy to help lift up that knowledge and that expertise, and bring in new ideas to freshen up the movement and push it forward.
Ishmael, I'm wondering, in your case, like, what gave you strength to advocate on behalf of the unhoused community in Vancouver? Especially because I was looking at some of the reporting about the modular housing, and like seeing these like almost counter protests led by adults and concerned parents, like rightfully so, thinking about the safety of their children's communities, but like then the young people saying, no, we really want this, like, we're not afraid, we've got this, and being able to stand up to, like, the ruling powers of your household, I thought was super interesting. Maybe you could talk more about that.
Sorry, I was unmuted there for a second. I think that in that particular situation, it was beneficial for us and advantageous for us to highlight the fact that we were youth, only because the preceding narrative was that this would be harmful to youth, and it was a very clear, or actually, no, it won't be. And there's evidence that this is, like, housing doesn't hurt communities, it makes us stronger. And even that evidence doesn't matter, because the bigger point is that people deserve housing no matter what. I actually quite like the framing of your question about youth. I think that in virtually every struggle that we have going on right now, including the climate movement, as youth, we have so much to learn from people who've been doing this work. And I think that it's actually extremely important that we not only that we reframe this from, like, taking the charge or re-energizing these movements to supplementing these movements and working in collaboration with people who've been doing this for decades. I think that as youth, we, yes, are sometimes neglected by decision makers, but we also have very clearly have privilege, in that we are disproportionately more healthy, we have much more resources invested in us than people who are seniors in our communities. Just in the past 2 years, we've watched our society as a whole barely bat an eye, while a majority of people who've had COVID-19 have been over, or who've died from COVID-19 have lived in long-term care facilities and are over the age of 65. We just don't talk about this stuff enough. We treat our elders as a society in the West as largely expendable, whereas where I'm from in Bangladesh, that wouldn't happen. Our elders are the most important thing, and it's extremely ridiculous to me as someone who, like has a window into how these two societies operate, that we let our elders rot away in these privatized, fragmented, underfunded long-term care facilities. And many of these people in the past 2 years have led the fight, and I would argue just haven't been given the platform and resources that other movements have been given. This is probably the biggest takeaway that we need to take away from the past 2 years of COVID, is that our elder care system is broken, it's broken, it's broken. And that's the number one thing that we have to fix going forward to build more resilient communities in preparation for new health crises. So I think the answer is intergenerational solidarity going forward. And the other thing is that like I've been organizing for not very long. It's been like 6 or 7 years now. And I know nothing. And many youth have been organizing very less than I have, and probably know more than I do, but also have a lot to learn, I think, from people who've been doing this work for a long time, who now have more responsibilities, or there are less resources being invested in them, have also other responsibilities in their lives, comorbid health conditions. And like, I think this is a lot more complex than youth aren't being given resources. I think as a society, we have to, or as a generation, I think we have to recognize our role. And the other thing that I'd like to say is that I think that many of the movements that we're part of, like the climate movement, has been largely framed as an intergenerational struggle between people that are younger and people that are older that are making decisions. I have probably, or definitely have emitted more and contributed more to the climate crisis than all of my ancestors combined. So I think there's so much more nuance and complexity to both the framing of the climate crisis and everything else. So I think, yes, you should be an important part of the climate movement, and other movements there should be more resources invested in them. But I think it's much more complicated than we're not given enough resources. I hope that makes sense. Sorry.
I think really your point about kind of this generation wars, and it's something that increasingly as a society we're seeing is really poignant. And I think it actually quite closely links with what Marina is saying, in the sense that let's take a look at where marginalized communities are. And let's look at the global scale, then we can narrow it down as we go. If you're looking at where the impacts of climate change are going to happen geographically, we're not looking largely at the global north, being Western Europe, North America. Looking at the global south, which as a result of colonialism happens to be extremely vulnerable, and also its geography as well by its nature. But many of the world's most vulnerable populations live in areas in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific, outside of where most of the wealth in the world is focused. And as a result, they're not prepared for what's coming, and they're the ones who are feeling it the most. So if we look at who's living there, and that tends to be people outside the global north, as I said, where it's predominantly white, in places where it is not. So we're looking at, we're talking from Canada, which is still slight at this point, but still a majority white country. We're talking with a lot of privilege and a lot of power that these other countries don't necessarily have at a global scale, which is really, I think, in conflict with the leaders in the climate space. When you look at the leaders, they're young, they're women, and they are diverse. I mean, of course, the most famous is Greta Thunberg, who fits to those criteria, but there's so many more. And I think that we have to remember that. So I think, Ishmael, exactly what you said, like there's this idea of generational conflict, which just, it's there, but at the same time, it's manufactured. And it's manufactured more than it actually exists. But realistically, we're talking about a society that's talking about other countries like they're lesser than, when realistically it's systems of colonialism, as Marina has talked about, these systemic issues that have been instilled over centuries that have caused many of these issues. And the people that are cleaning up the mess are the people that have the most to lose, ultimately, in every instance. So we're looking at in BC, largely you're seeing people from less affluent neighborhoods, or not strictly. And if we look at a continental scale or national scale, but we can see those things nonetheless. And again, largely they're young women as well. And I think that's just really important to lift up, but also remember that it's not just those people. That just as Ishmael was saying, there's people from every generation who care and people that are fighting. But nonetheless, I do think that because you have so much to lose in the face of climate change, and so much is threatened about their way of life going forward, there's so many people who are so willing to do so much to improve the futures for them and for other people, regardless of the age they will be. It just so happens that right now, that demographic, because there's so many of them globally, more than ever before, that there's so many leaders in that demographic because they have to be leaders because there's no other alternative.
Thank you for that, Will. I just wanted to jump in and say we do have around 9 minutes left. And so I just wanted to open up this time. If you have any questions, anyone in the audience, please feel free to leave them in the chat. In the meantime, while we wait, if any questions do come in, I wanted to just push the conversation into more of the topic question of the episode and ask, what is the ideal outcome for your work? And I mean that in just a hopeful sense, like all the individual actions that the three of you are doing, what do you hope to see come from your work? I want to know about the future for the three of you.
And I mean, so Youth for Nature's vision statement is a world where communities can thrive with nature. And I feel like that's also a good way to summarize what my vision statement is personally and what I hope the outcomes of the work that I do, but also the work that I do in a collective and with community really leads to, is communities being able to have the resources and the opportunity to thrive, not just survive, not just make it through, but to really to thrive with their communities and also with nature. The ways that we do that specifically at Youth for Nature is by supporting and uplifting young people who are already doing work and need help and need connections to communities and need opportunities to connect to decision makers who are often not young, but need to really listen to young people, especially I think when it comes to climate crisis and nature loss. Have connections with mentors, folks that have been doing this work for a long time, and that mentorship is intergenerational. There are young people that know so much, and then there are older folks that know so much. So connections to mentors for knowledge exchange, connections to funding to be able to support their work. And if there are more young people out there that have that access and feel like they can move into the nature and climate space and do work for climate justice, do work for nature loss in communities and be supported to do so and not feel overwhelmed or experience major burnout or experience tokenism, which is so fraught within youth climate spaces, especially trying to work in larger decision-making spaces. If we can mitigate that or even avoid it completely for young people so that folks are supported to do incredible work, and then that work of course has its impacts for nature and climate, yeah, that would be a success. That's the future that we're working towards, and yeah, I hope to see soon.
I can go next.
Yeah, please.
Sure. We at the Social Justice Center and PAC at the School of Medicine at UBC want to address people's material needs. That's the goal. It's to making sure that everything that we do is tied to making our society more just and fair to ordinary people who are in our communities, making our society more safe, making our society more healthy, and making sure that our healthcare system in particular is less insular and recognizes that things like capitalism, colonialism, these are things that affect people's health, and healthcare workers and people in the health space have to play a role in addressing those things as much as they do things like, I don't know, hypertension. And the other part of this is that the Social Justice Center is a largely young space. And I think what we're actively trying to do every day as an organization is recognizing how much value is added to the work that we do when we work with people that are older than us, people who have more experience, and people who have an entirely different situation than we do. And I agree largely with what Marina was saying about the importance of empowering youth and giving them resources to do the important work. And I think that's exactly, I completely agree with all of that. And I think the ideal outcome of the work that we're doing is building a generation of people who, when they leave their youth, when they're into their 40s and 50s, continue to organize, because activism and organizing isn't something that's tied to their identity as youth, but is something that, oh, we just got a public emergency alert, I think, all across, yeah. But that activism and organizing is something that is lifelong and doesn't leave us when we have responsibilities of becoming, like fully formed adults. And the other part of this is recognizing that in order to stand a chance against climate change, against capitalism, neoliberalism, and all of the things that we're fighting against, we need lifelong committed organizers who will do this work for decades and decades to come, and won't forget about all of this when they're in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about any of these kind of pieces, what ultimately, if we're taking a really long view, what we want is resilient and thriving societies. All of the work and I'll talk from my experience. That's what I know. All the work in the climate space is ultimately about humans. If we weren't here, we wouldn't be talking about it at all, because there wouldn't be a problem. And I don't mean that in a kind of neo-Malthusian way where humans need to be gotten rid of. I mean in the way that we are the source of much of the damage the planet has, or the damage the planet is experiencing, and we can't erase that. So how do we get there? So in a more immediate sense for myself is by addressing ocean issues. I mean, so through Surge, that means that acknowledging that climate change is happening, there's dramatic impacts, and I talked a lot about those impacts being first on other parts of the world, but we can't forget they're happening here as well. And so for Surge, we're focusing on looking at that here in BC because that's what's local. And so we're acknowledging, and I think we can all look at the impacts here in the Lower Mainland that have happened over the past year. I mean, with flooding, for example, just how that impacted our shorelines, whether that's the infamous barge that is still at Sunset Beach, or if that's the seawall that failed, which is so expensive, or the flooding on Ambleside or anywhere else on the Lower Mainland. That was dramatic, and that cost billions and billions of dollars, and it has the potential to displace by 2050. 2100 could be 250,000 people in the Lower Mainland alone. And that is an affluent, industrialized, well-developed region, one of the most developed regions in North America. And it's going to affect people's lives. And so we want communities and individuals to be connected to nature. And we want nature to be protecting communities. So that's why with Surge, we are really looking at this through a nature-based solution frame. And we want to be having that exacting ecosystem coordination between people and nature, because this whole idea of the separation between humans and nature is manufactured. It's never existed. The healthiest societies will exist in tandem with nature and in coordination with it. And then from the ocean-wise seafood side, it's kind of a very similar lens. We're looking at the health of the oceans as a means to ensure the health of the planet and the health of people living there. And we take the frame of seafood because 3 billion people around the world rely on it as their primary protein source. We can talk about all the issues with the global fishing industry, but there's also people who are doing amazing things, and we have to work with that because we can't just ignore it either. Those problems are real, but we can help fix them if we work with those people, and people rely on that for their livelihoods, and we can't ignore that either. So I think it's really about remembering that long view, that there is this future that is possible, and it still exists, of this thriving, resilient world that has nature and humans living so closely connected, and keeping that perspective, and then with whatever specific work we're doing, that's something that really fuels that. And so I think that's kind of the ideal outcome ultimately.
Thank you so much, Will. I also wanted to thank all three of you for all the fantastic insight you had today. I wanted to give you all an opportunity before we got off the meeting today to plug anything going on, any links, any social media. I know we talked about some before. Whoever wants to go first, we can talk about what you wanted to share.
I mean, the only thing I have to plug is Youth for Nature's socials. Yep, there it is, youthfornature.org, or at Y for Nature on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. It's the same username across all platforms. Definitely check us out. Sign up for our newsletter. That's where we share opportunities to get involved. Oh, and that's the story map. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Definitely check that out. I hope that can be a source of inspiration for folks on the call as much of it as it is for me.
And follow Marina on Instagram and Twitter.
There I am.
There we go. Thank you so much, Marina. And then also Will, here is his social media, and also Serge's social media. Will, is there anything else?
Yeah, no, following up Serge. We don't have a website as of yet, but we do intermittently post some things on our Instagram, and it's some exciting stuff. If you want to know what an oyster reef is and how amazing it is for the planet, definitely follow along. They are really cool, and they can be used for some awesome solutions, both for ecosystems and communities. And also, in terms of ocean-wise, we are hiring on the seafood team. So if you are interested in or looking for a position, we would love to work with you, and I would love to work with you. So just check that out. But yeah, follow along for any kind of life updates or surge updates. There's some exciting things coming on that side.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And lastly, Ishmael, is there anything else other than your Twitter and the link we have provided? So you can follow Ish on Twitter here. And then also here is the link to the Justice Center.
Yeah, no, nothing other than that. The second link here is the UBC Medicine Pack. If you go onto that website, we recently published a policy paper outlining our vision for a more healthy and just housing system here in BC, and just held a week of meetings with about 35 MLAs talking about policies like vacancy control, more expansive protections for renters, and massive mobilization of building social housing to end homelessness. And you can check that out and support that work at that website as well. And that's all I have to plug.
Awesome. Great. Well, yeah, once again, thank all three of you for joining us today. Aryan, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, this season has just been incredibly inspiring and enlightening for myself as a youth invested in change making. But I also want to shout out the Student Innovation Challenge, which is a partnership between Raincoast and Take a Stand Youth for Conservation, as a way to kind of take everything that we've been learning about this season on Coastal Insights and kind of put into the real world through using art as a means to change your community and just kind of uplift local perspectives. More information can be found at this link. But then also I want to shout out my own initiative I've been part of called Salmon Stories with Magic Canoe. These are locally sourced perspectives as they relate to salmon conservation, and is our attempt as an organization to get political by getting personal and by putting names and faces to the just massive impact that salmon has all across the west coast of North America. But yeah, it's been an incredible opportunity to host this season with Makai and to be able to talk with amazing guests like Marina, Will, and Ishmael. Makai, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what you said, it's been such a cool opportunity to not only host and meet so many cool faces, but also to be working with Raincoast Conservation and Take a Stand. Huge shout out to both of them. Huge shout out to Asta Mill and Allison Kermode. Yeah, we would have not been able to really put everything together in such a nice formal capacity if it wasn't for these two fantastic organizations doing amazing work. So yeah, my gratitude goes to them, to the guests, and to Aryan. It's kind of been a really good opportunity to become closer friends through these last 6 episodes. So yeah, it's been really exciting. But yeah, one more thank you to everyone watching at home from the whole season, and everyone who's going to watch after the live stream is over, and it'll be on the YouTube channel, as well as all of our guests. But yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Makai and Arian, and it was a pleasure meeting Marina and Ishmam as well. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Well, have a good rest of your afternoons, everyone watching, and our 3 guests. And yeah, thank you so much. This has been Coastal Insight Season 3.